Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Thursdays on the Stoop session with Penguin Random House. Today, we're going to learn a little bit about the different roles and skills in relation to publishing. And we have some amazing guest speakers. We have Matt Schwartz, Katie Zilberman, and Michelle Giuseppe. I hope I said that correctly. You can correct me if I didn't.
No, you're good.
Awesome. So I'll pass it over to Matt. You guys can get started.
Hey everyone, how you doing? I am Matt Schwartz. I'm Senior Vice President of Random House. We're going to do some quick introductions here, and then each of us are going to take a little time to explain what we do to give you three very different examples of other careers in publishing outside of editorial. Just to give you some different ideas of what's out there. Even if you are looking at editorial, these are other jobs that you can contemplate. And if you're not looking for editorial, it just gives some examples of different avenues you can always go. And I think I've told you my job, and I guess we're kicking off with a fun fact for each of us as well, which I hear is the norm sometimes here. So I will just say that that I have placed in the World Championships of Pinball. So I'm gonna kick it over to Michelle.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Giuseppe. I am the Senior Publishing Manager at Crown, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And my fun fact, this is like my go-to one for all of these little icebreaker things. I have one less vertebrae than everyone else. Kind of strange. But yeah, so like I said, I'm Senior Publishing Manager at Crown Publishing Group, which is sort of a title that means nothing to most people. So it is one that needs to be explained. But pretty much it means that I sit in the publisher's office. And that gives me a pretty bird's eye view of the entire publishing process. So I'm involved in everything from prompting the editors to start thinking about how they want their books to be described on Amazon, to working with their social media team to come up with a list of books to promote for a holiday like Mother's Day, to finding old contracts to determine if we have the rights to publish a print-on-demand hardcover. It's sort of the job that works with, it's sort of a job that works with many different departments. And for that reason, relationship building skills are key. A lot of my role is also helping the editors stay on top of their deadlines. So if you have project management experience or operations experience, this is a great role for you. There's a lot of following up with people to make sure that things get passed along to other people who need them to do their job. So for example, our sales team uses something called TI sheets or title information sheets, and they use those when they're talking to buyers at retail accounts about our books. So they're kind of like pitching the book to the store so that the buyer can decide how many copies they want to take. And so it's my job to communicate the TI sheet deadline to our editors, and then route that TI sheet to copy editing, our publisher, and others. I then send the edits back to the editor, who will make the changes before the next deadline, the first of which is our launch meeting, which is the first time where we present a list of books to our sales team. And then there are several rounds of this feedback loop that happen before the TI sheet is eventually presented to the buyers at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local indie bookstore, etc. And so attention to detail is also super important in my role. So while it's up to the editors to actually make these changes on their TI sheets, it's my responsibility to make sure that those changes are made by the deadline. And if not, I follow up with them to make sure that the TIs are in the best shape possible for presentation to those retail accounts. Another big part of my role is overseeing our backlist. And so a backlist book is any book that was published more than a year ago. And here at Crown, some of our most active backlist titles that you may have heard of are Michelle Obama's Becoming, Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl. So both of those books were published several years ago, but they continue to sell today. And so my backlist management responsibilities range from surfacing books that are newly relevant to the zeitgeist because of the current news cycle. An example of that is we recently promoted an excerpt on our social media channels highlighting a book about AI with all of the ChatGPT news. And so then I'm also responsible for updating an ad that lists an author's previous books in the back of their forthcoming book. We call that a back ad. So I'm responsible for identifying those books, reaching out to publishers, so sometimes the book will be published by us, but sometimes the book will be published by someone on the Penguin side. Sometimes the book will be published by a totally different publisher. And so then I have to kind of do some LinkedIn digging to find the right contact. And then also in terms of backlist, I am often in communication with movie studios when a book is made into a movie or TV series. So coordinating with them on licensing the cover art so that we can produce a book with the key art. We take the key art from the movie and then sometimes we'll put it on our book cover so that it's very easy for consumers to make the connection between the movie they just saw and our book. So before I came to Crown, I worked in the marketing department at Penguin Publishing Group, and having that marketing training really helps understanding how we can amplify some of our older books and relate that to the current moment. But I really think that any marketing job would give you the skills to handle some of this. And then looking even further back to the very start of my publishing career, a big reason I think I landed my first internship in publishing was that I had experience writing SEO optimized blogs for a custom clothing company. This was a part-time job I had in college that I kind of just fell into. And the folks who were interviewing me seemed very impressed that a college senior had so much knowledge about SEO. And while that knowledge was certainly beneficial in my role as an online marketing intern, that kind of knowledge would also be helpful for someone on our copywriting team, or you'll hear a little bit about Matt's team later, and someone on Matt's team would also benefit from that kind of knowledge. And then from that same custom clothing company, I also have customer service experience, which comes in handy in a few different ways. So first, our customer service team will occasionally come across a question that they can't answer about one of our Crown books. And so those questions eventually make their way to me. I will dig into questions ranging from, why can't I buy this book in the UK? Or is the text in this paperback smaller than normal? And from my experience in customer service, I'm very used to exploring all possible avenues to answer a customer's question. If any of you have worked in customer service, you probably know that there are sometimes crazy questions that need to be answered. And so that is sometimes a fun thing that I get to do. And then I'm also responsible for helping authors and their teams coordinate book orders for their speaking events. So if an author gives a talk at Google, for example, I will work with Google to figure out the best way for them to place their order, which is something I had direct experience with working in customer service as well. For author orders for speaking engagements, not only do I need the standard information like billing and shipping address, but I need to consider how they want the books to be shipped out, because there are certain retailers that we can work with if books need to be shipped to one address versus to many different addresses, and knowing exactly which questions to ask and effectively communicating the order process is a skill I learned in customer service that still serves me today. And finally, having customer service experience has prepared me for communicating effectively with my colleagues, agents, authors, and other outside partners. It's one thing to know how to do your job well, but communicating the relevant steps in a process and how things work is a completely different skill. And having experience explaining order details and nuances to customers was good training for explaining complicated printing, inventory, and shipping situations to my colleagues and outside partners. And sort of one other thing that I think is often overlooked, there's always that joke that you never use the math that you learned in high school in the real world. I do a lot of math in my role, actually, from trying to figure out how many to comparing the orders that we have for books versus the inventory that we've printed, and determining how many more books we need. So there is a little math thrown in there as well. But that is it for me. I don't know, Matt, am I throwing it back to you?
No, that's great. Let's throw it over to Katie, and I'll just say to everybody, if you have any questions at all, feel free to type them in the chat, or raise your hand. You can put them in the chat, and we're going to leave time at the end to where you can ask about questions, whether they're related to our jobs or other jobs, or anything to do with Penguin Random House. But Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Katie Zilberman. I'm a production manager with Random House Publishing Group, which is the adult publishing section. And I could relate to a lot of what Michelle said. I use more math at my job than I would have thought, like coming into the world of publishing. My fun fact is, well, I guess not as much of an accomplishment as the pinball thing, and not as crazy as the vertebrae thing. But my first internship in college was at the Colbert Report, and that was how I ended up moving to New York City originally, because I'm from Buffalo. And so yeah, I came here for that, and then this is also going to kind of tie into my pre-publishing background. After college, I moved back to New York and worked freelance in TV production for about 5 years. So I was like a production assistant. I was briefly a clearance PA for reality shows, which if you've ever like walked around accidentally in the back of a shot for a TV show, a kind of like annoying 20-something person with a clipboard will come up to you and ask you to sign away your image rights to be in the background. And I did not enjoy that job, but it was a great experience at just like forcing me to just talk to people. So yeah, I did TV production for about 5 years, mostly after got out of reality pretty quickly and did like live events and award shows. And I was looking to switch to something that had more reliable hours and kind of like get out of the freelance world into something full time. And so when I initially applied for a job in publishing, I interviewed for a position in like it was entry level, but it was a position as an assistant to like the publishing operations and production department at Random House. And I kind of just tried to highlight, like, anyone who has a freelance resume knows it's kind of weird to just be like, oh, I was here for 3 months. I was here for 2 months. And I just had like this long list of jobs that kind of had overlapping skills. So I ended up just doing a resume that was like, here are the skills I want to highlight. Here's my like management experience. Here's my organization logistics experience. Here's communication experience, without just being like, this thing specifically applies to this job, just kind of general overview. And then I had a second page that was just a list of like, just to show, I was working. I wasn't just like unemployed for 4 years and did like 1 year of TV production. So I came into Random House with a pretty good sense of how to do like project management and how to work with a lot of different departments, but I was coming in from a different world where like the end product is different, the terminology is different, the specific departments that you work with are different. But all of that is really stuff that the only way to learn how to do it is to do it on the job anyway. So, it's I'm sure I could have, if I had taken like a college program or internship about publishing, I would have come in knowing a little bit more of the terminology. But every division, even within the overall Penguin Random House group, kind of handles things differently, has different workflows. It's great to know some of these things, but most of the things you really like, once you're part of the team, you'll pick it up as you go. And I've definitely found that just like I've been here for 8 years, and it's the longest I've ever been in one place, like career-wise, but it's also I've like sort of shifted responsibilities and picked up new things as I came along. When I started, I wasn't handling, like I wasn't working on actual books. I was kind of just working on like as an assistant to the department and assisting with the other people who were working on actual books. But since then, I now work on print books, so hardcovers and paperbacks, and I do archiving for the department. I order bound galleys and advanced reader editions to help kind of get the word out before the book is published. And production manager jobs are kind of like, it's a little bit, it's similar to Michelle's position, but it's more about the physical life of the book instead of like the outward facing coordinating for the book. It's more coordinating like, okay, getting once the manuscript transmits from like the author to the editor, and then it comes to a production and a production editor to figure out a schedule and figure out like copy editing and proofreading, and do we have interior art in this book, figure out what the schedule is for the printers, how can we make sure that everything from the interior of the book to the covers and jackets is approved and ready to go and out to the printers and binderies, make sure we have like, if it's a really high quantity, like make sure there's enough paper for it, if it's on a specific type of paper. So anything to do with like the physical life of the book, and then making sure that the files for the book get to the right people who are going to need to use them in any capacity, basically during the life of the book, is a production thing. And when I started working here, I loved reading. And I mean, I know they say like, don't judge a book by its cover. I think everyone does it, but I do it so much more now because I like know what goes into it. So I'm definitely one of those people who will walk into a bookstore and like take the jacket out and be like, oh, what kind of stamping did they use on the case? And like what effects do they have on the cover? And oh, they used really nice paper. That is all, those are all things that I learned on the job and just from seeing, production samples, sample copies of finished books. And probably one of the biggest perks of working in production is that I do still, even in a remote work environment, I do still see sample copies of the finished books because I have to check them for quality issues and then send out pictures to the book team saying like, hey, books have arrived, they're in the warehouse, everything hopefully looks good, there's not like a printing error. But yeah, I would say production is probably an area where you need to be able to communicate with a lot of different departments and then multitask because, right now I'm working on several different books at a time. They're all kind of at a different phase of the schedule and they're all with like a slightly different book team. So I'm working with a different like designer and interior designer, cover jacket designer, different production editor. Usually they're coming from different editors. Yeah, so each book is kind of its own project, but the more of them you do, like, I don't know, I guess your bandwidth kind of increases the longer you're here because you just go like, oh, it's one of these types of books. Like this one is going to be a horrible schedule and we'll just get through it. Or, oh, this one's really nice. It's going to be a piece of cake. And we can almost do it on autopilot. But yeah, so I think the key things for production are you have to be really like detail oriented, but you also have to have a sense of the big picture in a scheduling sense, because, you're going to be with this on for the life of the book. And I'll throw it back to Matt.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both. I'm not going to talk that much about my specific job, but I will say again, I oversee digital strategy. I've been in publishing for about 25 years. And really what my team does is they focus on everything having to do with online retail, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.com, bookshop.org, Walmart, Apple, any number of places. So the Really, if you're ever going to Amazon, you're looking for a book you're looking for an Easter picture book for toddlers, 3 to 5 years old, then one of my team's goals is to make sure that our book is the one that comes up, and that when you go to that page, you're going to see what you want in order to convince you to buy it. But rather than talk so much about that, I want to explain more just in that my team, really, to be clear, almost no one on my team had any kind of digital strategy before coming to my team. They worked for a variety of different jobs, some of them editorial, some of them production, some of them what we call managing editorial, which is kind of the coordination of the manuscript. And so some of them came from marketing, some of them came from publicity. And really, in my case, it's one of those jobs that, as Katie alluded to, despite what you may see in job descriptions or job listings where they're saying nice to have, a lot of what you do is you learn on the job. And even from someone who, let's say, came from Simon & Schuster, I came from Simon & Schuster and came here, because most publishers are dealing with internal systems that are proprietary, you're learning a lot of new tools anywhere you go. So you should not feel intimidated necessarily by seeing certain things listed that maybe you don't have. I mean, there's never any harm in applying anyway. To be clear, on my team in particular, what I have always looked for is, as Katie and Michelle both mentioned, attention to detail and really the ability to manage your own time. And I think all three of our jobs, we kind of have a sense in any given week what we have to accomplish. And in a lot of ways, we're left to our own devices in order to prioritize and figure out how to get that done within a certain time period. So it's not a job necessarily where someone is always there telling you what you need to be doing right at this moment. And a lot of times you may have 10 or 20 or 30 different things that you're juggling and keeping track of. So again, that time management skill really helped. As for myself, I had no desire to go into publishing. I didn't even know it was a thing. I liked reading. I had a pretty crappy day job in marketing for a non-book related company. I was completely broke and was working in a bar at night. And I liked books a lot. This was back in the 90s. I was a big horror science fiction fan, and I wrote a bunch of authors and small publishers and said, hey, this is before websites really existed. I was like, I'll give you a free website. I taught myself how to do simple HTML if you send me your books for free, because I can't afford to buy your books and I like your books. And many of them took me up on it, including George R. R. Martin before Game of Thrones was so huge. But I was a big fan of his from before Game of Thrones for the horror fiction he had written. He was one of, I think, about 30 or 40 different authors that took me up on this. And I ultimately got a lot of books, which was great, and then created an easy hub for people to find all these things together. Barnes & Noble saw that and asked me to come be one of their first employees for BarnesandNoble.com. I think I was like their 9th or 10th hire or something like that. And so again, just I'm using that as an example to say, didn't have any interest in it, didn't really have any especially relevant experience in terms of jobs, although I did have a hobby that ultimately played into it much more. And I will say, having worked in a bar, one of the things that many people on my team can attest to is if you have experience in, let's say, a service industry or customer service, as Michelle said as well, it's not something to play down that it's irrelevant, because it's not irrelevant, especially on my team's case. Most of my team, as I think both Michelle and Katie have also talked about, is a lot of it is communication with a lot of different stakeholders on any given book. And some of them may be in the company, some of them may be outside the company. But as I've said to my team, when you work in service, service job or customer service, you really learn how to, I guess, retain your composure and communicate respectfully, even with people who are not offering you the same courtesy, which can be really frustrating. But that's a real skill, and it is not something to be taken lightly. And I would say communication and attention to detail and the ability to manage your time are the three things that I've always looked for. Everything else, for almost all of the people on my team has been something that most of what they've learned has been on the job. And I think that is, it goes for a lot of jobs. There are a lot of people who have worked in marketing and publicity who have entered the force not having had marketing publicity jobs. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, everyone has to start somewhere. And, and while, again, you may see these places being like, hey, nice to have a year or two experience or along those lines, it's important to note that you may have other experience that's relevant. And I urge you to make sure it's on your resume. And I also urge you to play it up in your cover letter if you can tie it in to what publishing has to offer. Maybe you have a real interest in books, you just love books, and you've been working in a completely different industry. I would say a few years ago, that might actually be more challenging to get a job than it would be today. But I think that publishing has recognized that for too long, we've become too dependent on people that have the same experience as ourselves, and that the expertise that people bring from other industries is something to be valued, not something to be questioned. Because it's easy to become complacent and do things over and over again the way that you've always done them. But a lot of the people that we all work with have more recently, especially, come from outside industries, bringing a fresh perspective. And so, again, I just want you to recognize that can be a strength. Does that mean that everywhere is going to feel that way, or that every job you apply to is going to see it that way? No. But what do you have to lose? I mean, and again, I think it's important to be confident in what you're bringing to the table. And I don't know what your individual expertises are, what you've been doing, whether you have publishing experience, whether you don't. But if you're interested in applying for a job, then I say lean into it and figure out what you've done that might be relevant in terms of a skill set, even if it's not directly related to publishing. I think in general, one of the reasons that I love doing this particular panel, and that I'm glad Michelle and Katie have talked so well about what they do, is that, I think if you really want to get into publishing, and I recognize that a lot of people think they want to go in and be an editorial, my recommendation is always don't thumb your nose at a job in publishing that may not be what you dreamed it was, and don't necessarily thumb your nose at working on the kinds of books that you personally don't read. And I think I feel it is, when I see people apply, I feel more often than not, I feel that they have boxed themselves into things in the way that they describe what they're looking for. And, I have always viewed it as a positive to work on the kinds of books that I have not worked on before. When I was hired at Barnes & Noble, I was mostly there for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But within a couple of years, I had basically been promoted to oversee all of their editorial content for all of their books. And it was an eye-opener to me, and it actually opened the path for me to see what I enjoy. I worked at children's books at Simon & Schuster for a couple of years as well. And again, I think the answer, one thing about publishing is that it's not incredibly hard to change your job once you're in it, especially at a company like Penguin Random House. It's not an industry that's especially hard even to jump around from company to company. And so I would not worry so much about feeling pigeonholed by what your first job is, or second job, or third job, or anything. Again, I think one of the main people that reports to me that oversees all of our metadata has been in the industry, a long time, and has had many different jobs that cross editorial, marketing, along those lines as well. And so, if it's obviously there will be select jobs that certain skills are going to be necessary. And, as an example, if your dream is to work in cover art production or interior design, not always going to be the job that's going to be the most forgiving about you learning on the job how to use Photoshop or how to use other tools of the trade, right? In my particular area, Microsoft Excel and Word are probably 90% of the battle, and Microsoft Outlook, which you don't have to know, but is obviously that Microsoft suite accounts for a lot of what my team had to know coming in, even though there are other tools that come in. Katie, are there any job tools in particular that you had to know that you felt coming in? I'm just curious.
I feel now that I've been in production for a while, I do use Photoshop and InDesign kind of at a basic level, but across the production department, so we probably have about 15 people in our Random House Group production, and it's a pretty wide range of skills. Like we aren't really like art heavy books, but we do sometimes have photo inserts. Some people do their own insert prep in-house and are more familiar with InDesign and Photoshop. But even just within our team, we have a thing called Photoshop Fridays where we it's optional, and people who want to learn more about Photoshop can pop in and share like tips and tricks, and we'll be like, okay, today we're learning how to. So one thing that's very common is when you're going from a hardcover to a paperback, you take the author photo from the back jacket cover and you put it on the About the Author page on the inside. So one thing everyone in production has to learn how to do, no matter what their skill level, is just convert that photo from color to black and white so that it can print in the book. But there's a little bit more to it. There's like an action you can run to make sure that it's going to be it's not going to print too heavy. This is definitely something that I did not know how to do coming into the production world. I think I was also very comfortable in Microsoft. I can great with Excel and Word. I have I think I had, and Adobe, but I've learned a lot more since I started. And it's not like interior design or cover jacket design where they expect you to have gone to art school or use this extensively. It's more like we can train you. You're going to have to interact with it, but we can train you to the degree that you need to use it.
How about you, Michelle? Was there anything that in your day-to-day, are there any tools that are not proprietary to our company that you felt you should have known before coming in?
Not really. I mean, I've learned Power BI on the job for some of our reports and things. When I worked in marketing, I had a very similar experience to you, Katie, where there was just a couple of things that it was beneficial for the marketers themselves to know how to do in Photoshop instead of bothering our ad promo team for every little thing. So I learned how to make a 3D book jacket and some quote cards, sort of just more they gave us templates and it was our responsibility to kind of drop in the cover art or a new quote from a bookseller. But yeah, other than that, I use Excel a lot. I use Word a lot. I use Google spreadsheets sometimes when we're sharing a spreadsheet with an author. It's just easier to update live. But yeah, not a ton of tools.
I guess I will say if you have some familiarity with Dropbox or Box, we've recently really switched because we were kind of server based before, and now we've kind of switched over to using Box for everything. It's pretty easy to pick up once you start working in it, but that would probably be a good thing to put on a resume if you're oh yeah, of course I know how to use that, but I didn't even think it was relevant to list as a technical skill. It's just something that we use a lot.
Yeah, that's great. I will say also, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I just got a question to a direct question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
And it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about. It says, helpful to hear you talk about a skills-based resume. I'm also coming from the freelance world and struggling to tailor my resume for more traditional work applications. Wondering if you have any resources or examples you'd recommend for best practices to create this kind of resume. Well, I did want to throw it out to the whole group because I last updated my resume probably 8 years ago. There is kind of a joke in production that everyone in production stays there forever. They kind of move around within the department or sometimes shift over to different departments, but I don't think it's been a while since someone has left Random House. But I would say that one thing I found helpful when I was structuring mine was I made kind of a generic one that I could tweak for jobs that I was applying for, but I did have like a professional profile at the top that was just a couple sentences about me that had kind of like the keywords we were talking about earlier, like about organizational skills, time management, communication. And then I think I Googled, I know this is just like, now there's probably like AI things you could Google to get actually a really good like template for a resume, but I think I Googled transferable skills resume and just looked at a ton of templates and then like tailored it to what my specific work experience was, because I really wanted to highlight, like, I do a lot of logistics. I wanted to highlight like, oh, I can, you know, multitask and manage things when there's a lot going on and like keep a cool head when things are crazy. And it's hard for that to come across when you're just listing, you know, employment periods. So I tried to, yeah, I guess I just tried to make it more about, you know, some specifics and some things where, you know, if you're talking about, you don't have to just be like managed a team. You could say like, you know, managed a rotating team of assistants to help, you know, supply an office, or, you know, whatever your experience was. It can be specific and it can be results oriented, and it can be about that different career that you were in, but it, you know, it doesn't have to be super technical nitty gritty about something that's not going to be as important to a different field.
That's great. Do you mind saying again, sorry, I'm sorry, there's a question.
Oh.
Do you mind saying the titles again of some of the best entry-level jobs in publishing? I run a small independent press, but interesting working. I mean, I think, hang on a second, I will drop it in the chat. And obviously, I mean, like you know, it comes and goes how many jobs are open at any given moment. But, you know, in terms of entry-level jobs, I mean, there's any number of them, but I'm gonna put the link in here just for where to apply on Penguin Random House, and you can actually directly click on entry-level jobs themselves. They separate them out, but you know, all of these, you know, many areas, and certainly when it comes to places like marketing or publicity, or editors, like an editorial assistant or marketing assistants or publicity assistants, have entry-level positions. And I think those are some places to start, but you may even see entry level in other places, such as subrights, which is selling the rights for books overseas to different places, or sales, working in sales, you know, or again, when it comes to production, managing ed, you know, I mean, all those things are in there. So I think most of, you know, it's worth looking at. It's worth looking at for sure. Whether it's necessarily something that appeals, again, I think that in some ways the question is, if you got it, well, and again, this is a fair question to ask if you're ever on an interview, is, hey, you know, I mean, what, you know, what's the opportunity for learning about publishing as a whole through this job as well? Will I be interacting with other divisions, other departments? Obviously, you also want to ask, regardless of what the job is, kind of what your day-to-day is going to look like. Because again, while our jobs in particular are a little more on the time management side, you know, there may be assistant level positions that are much more like, today you're going to do this for 3 hours, you're going to do this for 4 hours, along those lines. You know, I think there's a variety of different things to do. I will say also, just going back to the skill question really quickly, you know, if there are things that you're curious about to learn how to do, and you're not in a position necessarily to go to school for them or anything like that, I don't know how many of you have ever used LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com, which is basically thousands and thousands of training videos that are, I would argue, are probably the best in the business in terms of how to learn how to do anything, and breaks it up by step. It's, you know, and it can be, you know, it can be Excel for dummies, or it can be the most advanced thing in the world. They really cover the, you know, the whole gamut. It's not just these kinds of things. If you want to learn how to podcast and things like that. So feel free to take a look at that as well, even if you're curious about maybe what are some of the tools that might be relevant to a particular job you're looking at. If you're looking at a job description and you're seeing certain tools listed, that's at least one way you can familiarize yourself with them as well. But again, I do, I think, I think certainly when it comes to editorial assistance or marketing assistance or publicity assistance, Katie, what does an entry-level job look like in production? I'm just curious. Is there?
So there is a like general production assistant position. I came in as a production operations assistant because I was kind of in a hybrid world between production and managing editorial at the time, and then I shifted over into like full-time production. And actually, I don't know if other departments do this, but I know like on the production side, because we work so much with like the vendors that print covers and jackets and like the binderies where the books are actually made, they do like, especially for the more junior level members, they had like field trips where you would go to like go out to Long Island and go to like Coral where we print a lot of our covers and jackets, or we went to Bound Galley Printer where they do digital printing. And then there's a bindery tour where you can actually see. And, you know, a lot of these were like a bus trip. There's also a trip that I think anyone at the company can do to our warehouses in Westminster, Maryland. And that was like just a really cool, I feel like maybe that's a pre-COVID thing. I don't know if they've started doing them again or if they're virtual now, but it's just a really cool way to get some insights into like, okay, you know, theoretically like, oh, I'm ordering the books to deliver to the warehouse, but to just put a like names and faces to the people at the warehouse that you might interact with and actually go there and see like the scope of it and some of their processes behind the scenes is just like, even in production where I feel like we do have eyes on a lot of different departments, like I'm constantly learning about things that I'm like, wow, there's entire departments and workflows that I just had no idea even existed behind the scenes. And a lot goes into making a book, but also like running a publishing company on this scale.
And even the example here, Tara, that you mentioned about having a small independent press, I mean, again, there may be things that you're doing that may be relevant. I mean, maybe you think of it as primarily editorial, but you know, one of the ways I ended up at Simon & Schuster was I had a small online bookstore for horror, and effectively, my entire marketing was all through social media. Back when I'm dating myself once more, back when MySpace was the be all end all of how to get people on to your store. But at any rate, but the thing is that even being able to, for instance, generate marketing buzz without an ad spend, because we don't have a lot of money to spend, so it's grassroots. That's a skill set as well. If you're running your social media, you know, campaigns as well, or, you know, maintaining social media presences. Many of the imprints have social media teams as well that range from assistant level up higher as well. Some places list that as part of marketing, some list it separately. You know, our group has what's called an advertising promotion department that focuses on designing ads and booking paid advertising spends as well. You know, there's lots of different things that you may have touched that may be relevant. And, you know, as Katie alluded to, it may just be worth tweaking maybe the order that you list things to match closer to what the job is that you're looking for as well, if that makes sense. We're coming up in the last 10 minutes here, and was there other questions that anybody had? It's fine if not, but I also want to give people the chance to either type in their chat, or they can just unmute themselves and speak up if they want. And I think all of us have touched many different areas as well. So even if it's about a job that is not necessarily one of ours, feel free to ask about it. And again, you know, if you're interested, I encourage you to go apply outside of, you know, art or maybe IT and maybe finance. Again, the specialized skills are not necessarily as necessary. I will say very quickly, as I was asked to as well, in terms of remote work, it's going to vary from publisher to publisher and from job to job. I encourage you to apply unless the job specifically says it must be local in New York. It is going to vary. I mean, Penguin Random House is a hybrid. We have many people that are not local. My team was actually remote before the pandemic, primarily because most of my team's job is sitting at a computer all day and like just sitting down and working and not being in meetings. And for them, it actually was a bit disruptive to be in an office environment where a lot of people were talking. And so it turned out that it was actually a little better for my team to be remote, for most of my team to be remote. There's a lot of people who have the opposite experience, especially in editorial and in marketing, where sometimes the more interactive elements of being in meetings offer kind of more idea generation along those lines. I encourage you to no harm in applying for it. It's going to vary publisher by publisher. But as you have heard, I'm sure, Penguin Random House in particular also definitely has people all over the map. I mean, I live in Brooklyn, but I go into the office maybe once every 2 weeks. But I'm the only one on my team of 11 that goes in the office even ever. The rest of my team is remote, and most of them were, half of them were remote even before the pandemic. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, even in production where I get sample copies of I get sample jackets before books print, I get like press proofs, I get sample books when they actually print. They just ship them to my house now. I'm back in Buffalo, so yeah, it's can't speak to other publishers, but Penguin Random House is very flexible about that. And I think probably more than half of our team is fully remote now, and the rest of the people come in anywhere from like 1 to 3 days a week. I don't think anyone's in 5 days anymore.
And I will say, being comfortable, if you have a job. Sorry, Michelle, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to comment about how our team kind of works. So being in the publisher's office, I sit on the editorial team technically, even though my job is not an editor. So our editors do really like being in the office. They like having the ability to kind of bounce ideas off each other and all of that. But in my role, as you could probably gather from what I've said about it already, I feel much more like what Matt, you were saying, how your team feels. Like a lot of the work I do really requires a lot of concentration. And so like I did move to the suburbs. I'm not in New York City anymore, but I am an hour train away. So I do go in probably about as frequently as you do, Matt, like once every 2 weeks, but I get so much more done at home. And I think there's a huge benefit to be able to like really, really focus here.
And I will say, if any of you have jobs currently that you are working remote, it's even worth noting that, especially if you're looking to stay remote, because there have been problems in going remote. One of the biggest issues has been, especially with entry-level jobs, that some people have difficulty learning their jobs remotely. And that can be a mix, both of perhaps having certain managers who are not used to training people remotely, but also employees who feel less sure of themselves in terms of proactively reaching out and asking about things as well. It obviously takes a certain kind of comfortableness with reaching out to people as well with questions. So I will say, if that is something you're comfortable with, maybe in a cover letter along those lines, or, it's fine to acknowledge that, because I do think that it is a skill set to be able to kind of take the reins and feel comfortable learning a job remotely as well. Even if some people are better with that than others. It is a challenge. And, in my group, we use a lot of different proprietary tools. It's a lot of screen sharing. I have someone on my team who records herself doing things so that there are videos available that you can actually watch the exact way she does it on her screen if you ever forget how to do it. So obviously, and she's been remote for a long time, but But at any rate, it is worth noting that if you are very comfortable with that, that's actually an advantage. A lot of people think that that working at home sounds great, but it's not for everybody. And it's, if you know that you are great at managing your skill, being available, the whole day and being easily accessible, most of us are chatting in real time using Microsoft Teams, which is, effectively a variation on instant messenger for a lot of people. And I expect my team to be available to be able to chat, even though they're remote as well. I'm not babysitting. I'm not worried about it. And I don't care if they go out to lunch or have a doctor's appointment or want to change the time they work. But it's understood that the ability to chat should be as easy as if we were in the office together. And if they're not available, then they just need to communicate that so that we know when they would be. And I think that is, again, something he's getting used to. Any other questions before we hop off? I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you all look at applying as well to jobs, whether it's with us or elsewhere. And I also, by the way, will put in a plug for next Thursday, April 6th. It sounds like Blue Stoop is hosting a live panel at 4 p.m. at the Head and the Hand Bookstore, featuring editors and agents discussing how to get a book published, from getting an agent to securing a book deal. And I definitely encourage you to do that as well. I know there's a lot of people in Blue Stoop who are writers as well. And yeah, so yes, thank you, bluestoop.org/events. And so, yeah, so I hope, like I said, I hope this has been great. And we really enjoyed it. And Michelle, Katie, any parting words?
Just thanks for having us. And if you aren't sure if a non-editorial career in publishing is right for you, just give it a second thought. And people will still, if you get the job, will still be like, oh, so you're an editor once you say you work in publishing. But
exactly.
There's so much more that goes on behind the scenes. There's really like something for every skill set, something for every personality type.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you for having us. Nothing really to add, but I'll just reiterate, it is easy to jump around once you're here. So it's not strange to get your foot in the door some way and then, make your way over to a different role. And there might be roles that you don't even know exist, that you might start working in marketing and then decide to go into something that you've never heard of before, like subreits.
And the company is constantly creating new roles. So it's, there might be something that shows up that didn't even exist when you started.
Thank you all, Blue Stoop. We appreciate it. We had a blast.
Thank you all
Thanks
so much for joining us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing anyone who is in the Philadelphia area at our in-person event next week. So everyone enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you for joining us.